Warwickshire in the middle of England, and Meriden officially is the middle of England. And you're all the way over in Canada, but
I am.
There's a story there, isn't there?
But I originated about what is it? What did you say? 20 miles or 20 minutes away from where you live?
20 miles and 20 minutes from where.
Well,
from where
there you go.
Yeah.
And you said it's actually the middle of England, and I never knew that.
Well, Meriden is the middle of England, and so Banbury, where you were born, would be about 25 miles from Meriden, probably.
All right.
Yeah.
You know, one of these days we'll actually have to do if my internet is good enough, we could do a Google Earth and we could show what the hell we're talking about to those that are watching us.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Okay. All right. But for the moment, we're going to concentrate on more mundane topics, aren't we?
We are, but they're important, whether it's for business or for personal. Yeah. It's a really important topic, and I'm glad that you suggested this. And what we're going to be talking about here today is increasing your effectiveness. And I'm really excited to hear your version of a really powerful law that we all live it, whether we understand it or not. After today, we're going to raise people's understanding about Parkinson's law.
Parkinson's law, exactly. And when we know that law, it's not just a question of knowing, it's a question of actually applying it and making it happen for us. Because it's all very well we can dream where we want to be and we can plan it and work it, but we actually make it happen by drawing up a plan. And we always recommend a 90-day plan, really, don't we, for making sort of new behaviours come into play. So we're going to talk about how to become more effective. Now, obviously, I think you'll all recognise this as being a diary, and lots of people keep a diary, you know, paper diary or electronic diary, and lots of things tend to go into diaries. But the question is, what goes into a diary, and also how long we allocate for various things in our diary, and you know, should we fill our diary or should we not fill our diary? And that's another interesting point that we might just cover in our discussion today.
So how many people use a paper diary, I wonder, or a journal or a day timer or whatever you want to call it, depending on what part of the world you're in?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think most of us have moved towards electronic diaries. However, the very act of writing things in a paper journal, diary, book, or whatever, it has an effect on our subconscious mind, doesn't it? So, for instance, if we're writing goals out, which you know a lot of us think you should do every morning, then actually writing them out on paper in a paper book with a pen actually means that they're more likely to go into your subconscious mind, and actually you're more likely to achieve them because it's a physical act that actually goes into a different part of your subconscious mind.
I have a question for you. Did you catch my live yesterday?
I didn't, I'm afraid.
Well, the reason I'm asking is, look at what I do. This is a journal, and it's not a time-based journal, but it does capture my thoughts, and it's got color, and it's got words. And the power of writing things down, as you said, etches it in our minds. And one of the things by etching it in our minds, it's a way to increase our effectiveness, which is, you know, we originally were thinking about calling this time management or manage your time. Well, actually, time management. But really, you can't manage time, can you, really?
No, can't.
So
there's my journal, exactly the same thing, Phil. So I have an electronic diary. Everything that I want to think about and do, I tend to write out.
And it makes a difference, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Now, I think I'll be covering this in a few minutes, but I'll mention it just now. The reason I say it's important to know what you put in your diary is because you need to allow for the fact that you might need to do other things that aren't in your diary. And if you don't leave space in your diary, then they never get done. So let's look at Parkinson's rule. So Cyril Northcote Parkinson, his rule was that work expands to fill the time available, which I think is very true. And the reason that's important is because if you agree with the 80-20 rule, which most people think applies to most things, and I agree with that, then if you allow, say, 2 hours to do a task in your diary, then you can guarantee you'll take 2 hours to complete it. If you were to allow an hour, then you would probably find you would complete the task in an hour. And if you allowed half an hour, then you might not find that you complete the task in the half an hour, but what you probably would find is that you do enough of that task to get 80% of the results. You'd certainly get, more than the 20% done that gets you 80% of your results. So one thing to make people more effective that you need to be careful about is not allowing too much time to do things, because if you allow too much time to do things, they'll take you that long. Would you like to comment on that, Phil, or does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I wanted to give another example.
Okay.
Well, you just came back from France, didn't you?
We did.
And you knew you were going to France in advance, probably planned it, right?
Yes.
And you probably had a bunch of things you wanted to get done before you. Did you take the train or did you fly?
We drove and we went on the ferry.
Oh, well, there you go. See, there's more options than I had anticipated. So there's always more than one solution to any challenge. So the challenge was going across the English Channel to France. Where I was going with that craziness, Bernard, was as you were getting prepared to go to your holiday in France,
Yes.
you probably had things personally and professionally to get done. Yeah. And you probably, because you knew you were going, you leveraged Parkinson's law, or it showed up for you, and you crammed a lot of stuff in that time you had allocated. Would that be fair to say that happened?
No, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. That's exactly what happened.
Do you have an example specifically that?
I've got another example as well. I do a lot of exam training work for financial advisors over here, and I've quite frequently been asked would I be willing to, present this exam training course maybe next week or, a couple of weeks' time. Now, bear in mind that the people on that course will be people who've had a manual. They've been working through the material for 2 or 3 months, possibly. They'll be studying, for the exam. So I've got maybe a week to be able to train them in stuff that they've been studying for 2 or 3 months. And the funny thing is, it's never actually been a problem, because what happens is because you've only got that week to do it, you actually work out what the salient things are that you need to be able to pick out and train, if you like. So again, it's one of those things that if you had a week to study for an exam, you'd probably study for the exam and pass it in a week. And if you've got 3 months, you'd probably take you 3 months. And it's exactly the same in your diary. If you allow 2 hours to do something, it will take you 2 hours. And if you allow half an hour, then you'll either get it done in half an hour or you'll get a lot of it done, such that the 80-20 rule, means that you've actually done the most important bit. Particularly if, and you would as a result of this, you would work with more urgency. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And we adjust our efforts to fit the time we believe we have, whether it's going on holidays or if it's doing a financial training course, or if it's whether it's the student or the teacher. This is an amazing bit of information. When I first was explained to me about it, it blew me away.
Yeah. Another example, actually, which is a really good example, is when we do presentations, we could spend 2 or 3 hours presenting some material. But you'll often find that actually you can get just as much information and understanding across in 20 minutes as you can in 2 or 3 hours. Hence TED Talks. TED Talks, they reckon the ideal time for a talk is 18 minutes. And you can probably get as much across in 18 minutes as you can probably get across in a couple of hours. So again, it's a great example of this Parkinson rule in operation, I think.
I love when we get together on our Fridays and have these conversations about different things, because I wasn't thinking about this in advance. But what you just reminded me about is one of the things I do is I help coaches, consultants, and speakers get on more platforms, convert at a higher rate, reduce the stress levels, and make more money. Mm-hmm. What we focus on with that audience is to develop a signature speech. And a signature speech could be 30 seconds long, could be a minute and a half, or it could be an hour, it could be a day, it could be an event. And what's key, I never thought of this Parkinson's rule, in terms of our speaking coaching that I do, but it certainly plays the same thing. We can compress our presentation to fit the time we have. And there's all sorts of things you can do to fill in a 3-day event versus a 5-minute presentation at your local BNI chapter or wherever you're hanging out.
Yeah.
Boy, I'm glad you brought this up.
What you'll find is you'll take things out and you'll condense things and you'll make things more succinct. And actually, you'll end up with something that's more effective and more punchy.
And more authentic.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't you find?
So anyway, that's to me, that's a big takeaway. I think that when we diarize things, we all know we need to go in order of importance. We all need to allow time to do the most important things. But I think one of the dangers to be aware of is not to allow too long. So I think that's more or less done justice to that principle. What do you think?
Yes, and there they are. So do a screen capture of this, guys. Make their notes and take these ideas. Now, I'm just playing around with the different options I have here as the director, and I'm going to now go put us back to both on screen. There we are. Look at that, live and in person. While we always were live, this is a live broadcast. It's not a, well, I guess if you see this after we've published it, it won't be live anymore. So you have to do #replay.
It'll be an afterlife.
It'll be an afterlife, yeah. So staying on the same topic of being more effective with the time that we have allocated, I want to go to the next component here, and I'm going to make sure I share the screen properly. There we go. It should be us now. Okay, so go to the next slide here. So the rules of time management. Actually, I went one too far.
Yeah, that looks good.
There we go. So the rules of time management, you can't save time. You can only allocate it differently. So going back to what Bernard introduced, the Parkinson's rule of Parkinson's law, it's how we allocate the things we do within the time constraint that we have. So constraint analysis. What is that? I don't know if you guys have seen this. Theory of constraints basically says that in every business, there's a limiting factor or constraint that determines how fast the job gets done. One of the keys to effectiveness is to identify the limiting factor, the choke point. That's what we're representing here, where you see it's compressing down into a channel. So imagine if you're on the highway and you're on a three-lane highway both ways, and you get into a bridge, but the bridge not wide enough to take all 3 lanes going both ways, you'd have a constraint. So probably that happens when they're doing road work and repairs, and they'd have a flag person there directing traffic. So that's a constraint. How does that apply in your business or in your personal life? Well, one of the keys to effectiveness is to identify where those limiting factors are in your personal life and in your professional life. And what you want to do is identify these choke points, these bottlenecks, and then and figure out how you can break through them, because these choke points determine at what rate you move forward, what speed you can move forward towards your goals. It's a really important thing. One of the things that this brings up for me is making sure you have a vision of where you want to get to and the goals that you want to have accomplished that help you get to where you want to get to. And if you adjust your goals to the place you want to go, the end point, then what ends up happening is you'll come up with ways to widen it, so the constraints aren't as constrictor isn't there, the bottom is wide open, or you're doing fewer things to get through. There's no right or wrong way to do this, other than what am I thinking about? Other than you making sure that what you're going after is the most important activity. So you can make progress towards your goals by removing and then alleviating any of these constraints. And then by doing so, turning them into a single task and an activity. So that's basically the theory of constraints. What factor sets the speed at which you achieve your goals? Bernard, you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, what I'd like to add is your friend of mine, Brian Tracy, what he says is that in any job, any occupation, any business, there'll be certain key skills. that you need to be able to master, and that the one key skill that you're not as proficient as you could or should be in is this constraint factor. It's the thing that will hold you back. So going back to being more effective, we need to identify what it is that is holding us back, because that you will only go as fast as the constraining factor. So you could be like 10 out of 10 on 6 skill areas, 4 out of 10 on a key one. You'll only be 4 out of 10 overall. So the priority then is to get better in that particular skill area. And often it's things like public speaking, isn't it? That's public speaking, or maybe prospecting if you're in sales. There tends to be a key skill area that holds people back.
I can't believe you just read my mind, because prospecting was absolutely the one. So the other thing that Brian Tracy talks about, it's like that TV show, what's your weakest link? So you might be really good at presenting. You might be really good at doing the needs analysis in the sales process. You might be really good at getting the commitment of moving forward and getting an opportunity to come to fruition. But the constraint you have is prospecting. And it comes in a wide variety of shapes, colors, and flavors. It could be picking up the phone. It could be knocking on doors. Well, maybe not so much today, but it could be doing virtual conversations. It could be going to a virtual networking group and having to be on a video. Those might be things that you're uncomfortable with. Those are your critical constraints. So if you identify what your critical constraints are, weakest link, and work on improving those on a 1% basis, so a little bit each week, and using the eighth wonder of the world is compound interest, isn't it, Bernard?
Yes.
And so if we were to take what we're talking about here back to what Bernard started off with, and that is the Parkinson's rule, and then looking at the critical constraints, what is it you could do in your life, personally, professionally, as a business owner, as an employee, as a team leader, it doesn't matter where. Identify where the constraints are that are holding you back to living your most potential life. Makes sense, right?
Yep, makes sense to me.
So one of the things I'm a big fan of is I want everybody that's watching this now or in the replay to think about Quink. Knowing what I now know, what will I stop doing, continue doing, and start doing? So now that you've heard this great couple of tips from Bernard and myself, think about your life. What will you stop doing that would help move you towards where you want to get to? What would you need to continue doing? And what is it you haven't started doing that would help elevate and move the needle to where you want to get to in your life? Anything to add to that, Bernard?
No, I think that's spot on. It goes back to what we said earlier about really a 90-day plan is sort of ideal here. It's what can you do over the next 90 days? Because if you do something over the next 90 days, it becomes a habit. And as we know, we form our habits and then our habits form us. So
yes,
really, an action plan for the next 90 days, applying some of these principles makes a lot of sense.
Great. So for those of you who are here again, we have an offer. Bernard, would you like to tell them what this is?
Yes, well, myself and Phil can both do this. We actually use a process, and it's algorithm driven, it's software driven, and basically we analyze a person's business, we ask certain questions and we quantify the answers, but we'll guarantee to find any business owner a hidden $100,000 of extra revenue within their business, and it'll be, it's all conservative and it's all proven, and you'll see exactly where it comes from. So that's something that we normally charge for, but we're offering free to anybody who's interested as a result of attending this Facebook Live event.
Yeah, and it's noticed here, it says, without spending a penny on marketing and advertising.
That's right. The money's basically the potential's already in there in the business. It's just a question of unlocking it, and that applies to virtually any business in any sector, to be honest. So
yeah, absolutely. So if you're not a business owner, but you do know a business owner, you can certainly share this with your friends. We don't. Yeah, let's just leave it at that. So if you're interested, best thing to do is to email us. Bernard, would you like to tell them what yours is?
I'm Bernard Keavy. I'm Bernard at Baltimore, BC. So Baltimore as in the uscity.co.uk, and it's phil@coachphil.ca.
Right. And we're part of the live streaming business renovator. And the reason I've come up with that name, Bernard's just part of the My Happy Family, is that we're actually in the business of helping businesses redesign who they are. So they need remodeling, they might need some sales training, they might need some financial assistance, they might want to learn how to be more effective with their time. Both of us are happy to help and have helped many people in business do that sort of thing. I'm happy to be here. I know Bernard's happy to be here. Any final words you'd like to say?
Well, the only other thing I was going to mention, which I didn't mention and probably should really, is when we're putting things in our diary, if we allow less time and work with more urgency, that frees up a bit of spare time. Now, a common problem people have is that events occur during the day, and because they think they have to be done that day, they're urgent, they tend to not do some of the things they'd planned to do in their diary and on their to-do list. So one of the things that a lot of experts recommend is allowing some slack time in your diary, maybe 20 or 30% of the day as slack time. And you can do that if you make sure that when you book time to do some of the tasks that you plan to do, that you don't allow too much time for them. Because by reducing the time you allow for some of those tasks, it does free up this spare time that you can then keep as slack time to be able to undertake the things that crop up during the day that tend to throw people off course otherwise.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think so, yes. And isn't there something along the lines that the success loves speed? So by compressing and putting things in, you get more stuff done. And by getting more stuff done, you'll find that you have more time in the day, and you'll be energized. You'll feel better about yourself. And Parkinson's law kicks in, and you break through the constraints that you thought you had. One of the things I like to call them, as a final thought, is everything that we're thinking about is really just an obstacle illusion. Yeah. Leave that with you for the weekend. Thanks for popping in and hanging out with us. Bernard, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Phil.
See you guys on the flip side.
Look forward to the next one.